Hello everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Today, I would like to bring the topic of gender diversity, or basically diversity from a broader perspective. I did this analysis for some other communities like OpenStack Foundation, Linux Kernel, or some others. Basically, what I'm going to present today is the data for the CPython interpreter, right? Kind of the outline. If we have some time, I have this guy here telling me, hey, you are losing time here, so we will see how many of these we reach. So a bit about me. I work in Vitoria. We started around 5 years ago. We came from the Universidad Rey Juan Carlos. Basically, we're doing empirical software engineering. In Vitoria, what we do is we aggregate a bunch of data sources from the usual data sources in open source, Git, Gerrit, IRC, Slack, and so on, and we massage, clean, and visualize the data, right? So basically what we are doing is software development analytics. As I mentioned, I've been involved in several similar studies, and we just released the OpenStack Gender Report. So basically you can Google OpenStack Gender Diversity Report, and then you can have this. This was kind of a business relation between Intel Corporation and Vitoria. I'm involved in some other analytics and dashboards from OpenFV community, Wikimedia, and Eclipse Foundation. So just a small disclaimer, I'm not involved in any Python working group. This is kind of own analysis and interest, so I may have missed some stuff, right? So that means that part of the data or the assumptions that I'm doing could not be that right, so I would love if you have some feedback, right? This is Tokyo. This is where all of this started. That was in OpenStack Summit in 2015. We had this conversation with Nithya Raf. She's currently at the open source office in Comcast. And basically, the foundation tweeted about the number of women that were participating in the summit as attendees, and they had this number of 13%. Okay, that's all right. But they had a tweet asking for, okay, how many of them are actually doing technical contributions? And they said, we don't have an answer, right? So, and this is basically the challenge here. So how can we measure gender diversity? Of course, diversity matters. If there are studies, again, if you look on the internet, there are some studies by Gartner and Forbes and some other people around saying that diversity brings innovation. And the more diverse a project, a business, a country is, the more innovative. Because you have several perspectives, right? You have different point of view to try to approach the same problem. Of course, I produced some numbers, as I mentioned. Those gain some attraction and so on. And in the end, I would say that this is all about transparency. We are in open source communities. This is not just about the code, but about the community, right? And if we talk about transparency, of course, there's room for improvement in code, but in the community as well, from several perspectives. And one of those is diversity, of course. And of course, our point from Vitoria, as we have this quantitative approach, is that we need data to make decisions, right? And of course, diversity is a challenge in any OSS project, as Naomi mentioned in her keynote. So I was looking around Python, and then I found this. So this is the definition in the code of conduct for Python. This is the Python diversity statement. So there's a bunch of things there. We can talk about age, culture, ethnicity, gender identity, expression, national origin, blah, 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 blah. So there are a lot of things to express diversity. We can go, indeed, even for a geographical distribution of the developers, or we can go for the companies participating, right? This talk today is about gender diversity, specifically. Let me bring some context. There are some surveys done so far. One of those was in 2013 by LibreSoft Research Group. I used to work there, but I left before this. Basically, 11% of the people answering were women, right? Then we have this report by the World Economic Forum, and they mentioned that 5% of the CEOs in tech world, in the tech industry, are women. Just a 5%. Then we have a 21% in the mid-level roles, and then we have 32% of women in the junior roles, right? So this is all about, we are producers, right? We are producing things, but we are consumers as well, right? And then we are in communities, in open source communities, that 10% of the population around are women, and we are producing things for 50% of the population that are women, right? That are consumers of this. So there's something wrong. There are some other companies. There are, this is kind of the industry, let's say. So Pinterest, which is the top left, claims that they have around 19% in the tech working groups that are women. Top right, we have Google. They claim that they have an 80%. In the bottom left, it's Facebook. Similar numbers, they are around 16. And the workforce in general, they are around 30% in terms of women. And then in the bottom right, we have Dropbox. In this case, those numbers were for the global company. They didn't have this difference between tech and non-tech working groups. Some other numbers. So we go to the open source world. We have OpenStack with 11%. The Linux kernel with around 10% of population. We are talking number of women actually contributing. Hadoop ecosystem with around 8%. We have some more data in the place for Vitergia. So the question was, what's going on with Python, right? Some summary here. We can say that the industry, women represent around 30 to 40% as a global in a company. In terms of the tech working groups, we are talking something between 10, 20, 15, 20. If we go to the open source world, we are talking about 10% at most, right? So it seems that there's a gap between companies and this. So first of all, we need to define what technical contribution means, right? For this specific analysis, we were mentioning commit. Okay, so commit is basically a piece of code where, right? So you develop something, you push everything to your favorite Git repository, that's a commit. What kind of information can we have there? We have the author, we have the committer, we have the date, we have the number of files that were touched, we have the areas of the code, the number of added lines, then the number of removed lines. Okay? Of course, there are some others, so we can go to GitHub, we can go to the code review process, we can go to non-technical contributions, so there are a bunch of information, right? But this is pretty focused on commit. We can go to some other potential metrics. So I'm going to show some basic ones as number of commits or number of women participating, but of course we can have comparisons between who are the most diverse companies. So what can we learn from those? But how is the code review fairness? So it's been fair, the code review, if a man is basically reviewing a woman. So there are some studies, if maybe you're not aware of this, but there are some studies done around GitHub. So you can look for this again in Google, right? Of course, we can go for sensitive information, affiliation, countries, time to review, blah, blah, blah. But again, this is focused on the Python interpreter, right? Architecture of all of this. I'm not going to show details in terms of pure technical details, but we can discuss later if you want. Basically, the original data source is Git. We are using Perceval, which is the mining tool. Then there's some enrichment process, right? And then the visualization. So there are three layers: retrieval, enrichment, visualization. The first one we are talking about in the case of CPython, which is github.com/Python. So around 50 repositories, 130,000 commits, around 1,000 developers. We're talking about the whole history, right? This is based in GitHub. For the mining tools, we are using Perceval. Just a side note here, we just enter in the Linux Foundation as a project of the Linux Foundation, Grimoire Lab, which is the tool is 100% open source. The same thing that we are developing is the same thing that we are deploying basically for our customers. So Grimoire Lab and Perceval, that it's part of Grimoire Lab, is now part of Chaos. Chaos is a group fostered by Linux Foundation. It's basically looking for health metric analytics. So the acronym is Community Health Analytics for Open Source Projects. Of course, we can go for open source projects, but for inner source and some other, basically, in general, software development processes within companies and organizations. So what does Perceval do? Basically, Perceval go to some repository, download the data, and export JSON documents. So you can do whatever you want with that JSON. It happens that we take that JSON and we put that JSON in Elasticsearch. This is our favorite database so far, which is basically the next step. In the meantime, when we have that data in the database, we have to improve the data. That's great. So if you go to Schemalace database, think of the data as a big matrix of information with several columns, and then each JSON document is each of the fields, each of the rows. So what are we using? When I started to think about this problem, I said I need some kind of simple approach because we are doing some quantitative approach. We are talking about communities of 10,000 of developers as OpenStack, right? Or 1,000 of developers as Python. So I cannot go one by one and say, okay, this is women, men, right? So there is a database, genderize.io, that basically you send a question. Hey, Daniel is a man or woman. And then you get an answer. It's a man with some percentage of probability. Of course, you can then detail by country. So then you can ask for Andrea in Italy or Andrea in Spain that usually have different genders. Some limitations. It's quite hard with Asian names and so on. But we are lucky enough to say, well, we are not that lucky. But in terms of this analysis, we are lucky enough that most of the code is done in Western countries. So we go to countries as South America, USA, Canada, and Europe, right? So it's quite good in this kind of analysis. Then basically I was using Pandas to manage everything, basically to work with data frames. So I took thousands of commits at the same time, and then I had to develop a small library to parse information coming from Percival. And then, of course, there's a lot of manual work. So you have to validate the data, go developer by developer, take the most important developers. Remember that we have this relation 80-20, so that means that the 20% of the community is currently doing around 80% of the code. So instead of going to the 1,000 developers, we can go just to 200, and we are covering 80%. It's great, right? So, and then for visualization, we are using Elasticsearch and Kibana. If you are not aware of this, it's a Java tool. It works, it's quite scalable. From our point, it's quite good because what we want to do is basically to visualize the data once we have everything clean and massaged. So we don't need to start querying to produce some other dashboard. Kibana is producing that dashboard for us. It's not our tool chain, it's Elasticsearch things, but we are using this. As we were exporting JSON documents, it's easy, let's say, to have something, some other size, MongoDB or something else. So some numbers. I produced a small dashboard here. Let me show you this. No, not. Oh, okay. So this is Kibana. This is Kibana 5. On the top right, we have the total amount of years we are analyzing. So let me go for the whole history. I don't remember, it was something like 20. Basically, what I did was to update the data. Once I have the data, everything gets filtered, right? So we have this top left here. We are counting the number of commits. We are counting the number of developers. We are counting the number of repositories, right? Then this top donut here is counting the number of commits by gender. So if we go for some first approach, we can say that the male, in this case, we're doing close to 95% of the commits in the whole history of the CPython, right? If we go for female, in this case, this is merely 1%, 1.25%. In terms of population, it's a bit higher, so we can go for a 4%. So 4% of women, of the population of the community are women, and they have produced around 1% of the total amount of commit. Then we can have this information by repositories. So let's go for CPython. Basically, what I'm doing now is to filter by CPython. So everything gets filtered, right? Then we have the total amount of commits, number of developers, repositories. Numbers are pretty similar, right? So we can go perhaps a bit smaller, a bit higher, but in general, we have similar numbers. So the question now is what's going on historically in terms of evolution. So we have 4 charts here. We have the number of commits by women, the number of women, right? Then the number of commits by men, and the number of men. So basically, I can say, having a look at the numbers, that after in 2014, 13, women started really to participate in Python, right? So there are some small amounts here, as you can see, but the real activity is basically this one here. So let me filter this time frame here, so we can have a look here. Again, numbers are quite similar, right? Sorry. So we are talking about around 4%, basically, in terms of population and kind of activity. Let me show you something else. This is another small panel. On the left side, we have commits by gender, the same as we had before. These are the files, the file path, basically. And then we have the file path and the repository and the number of commits. So let's have a look at where are the areas that women are mostly participating. We can see that in first place, they are participating in CPython, right? And mostly in lib/something and doc/something, right? Oops. If you go for men, the areas of the code are not CPython that much, so they are in MyPy and Planet and CPython and blah, blah, blah performance. For some reason, they are not that in lib/something, right? More things. I'll go for the other one. So, OK. This is the social network of the community. This is kind of beta thing in Viteria. We are producing for Kibana. So the point is basically the bigger a circle is, the higher the number of repositories that developer is working on, right? Then the bigger the relationships are, the higher the number of commits that developer is doing, right? And then the blue things are the repositories. So basically, if we have a look here, we can go that for the main, for the community, we have important developers as Donald, that is working in several repositories, and it's doing basically things in PSF, Python Software Foundation, whatever. Or for CPython, we have Victor, Stimner, and some others. I don't really know the community, so maybe I'm not pronouncing in the right way, right? So what's going on here about female developers? We have the social network. Of course, we have a fewer amount of developers, but there are some that are important for the community. Have a look here. We have the bigger, the more repositories they are working on. And if remember, the links are the edge are bigger, so that means that they are producing more activity there, right? So yes, so you have an idea of the kind of things that we can produce here, right? More things. Let's come back to the slides. So this was basically, just in case, the demo effect, you know? Blah, 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 blah. So some conclusions. Just for comparative, OpenStack 11, then we have the Linux kernel 10%, head ecosystem 8%, CPython we are around 4%. But something important, please forget about the numbers, right? Because even when OpenStack say that they have an 11%, these are crappy numbers. I mean, we are talking about that there is a glass ceiling of a 10%, so what's going on here, right? So diversity and inclusion is a challenge for everyone, not just for the Python, not just for CPython, but basically for the whole open source ecosystem. Data and technology are just tools, basically, to achieve our goals, right? So this is the kind of things that can be produced with open source and for open source communities, right? And of course, I would say that having permanent and updated data would be really great. So first, we are aware where we are, right? So we all know that CPython is around 4%. Of course, there is room for improvement, but we can go there and back, right? Some steps. I'm aware that this year there is no outreach in the Python because there were not mentors and some administrative stuff. As far as I know, as I read in the website, there are some things that other communities are doing. Open Source Summit, LinuxCon, they have this specific track, Diversity Empowerment Summit, that was in LA last week, a couple of weeks ago. So I was there, for instance, and we are having another talk in Prague. So they are producing a specific track just for diversity. Hey, so it's great. Working groups, PyLadies, of course, young and girls, women in open source, women of OpenStack. They are great groups and doing a great job. So if you're aware of something else, please let me know. I want to keep learning. What about the data? As far as I know, the only data I'm aware of is the report that we produced together with Intel. You have the link there. You can Google OpenStack Gender Diversity Report, and then you can have access. By the way, I brought some executive summary here and some flyers that we produced for for LA, so if you want to take later some information. Then, how to improve this? There is a cross-foundation initiative, so if there's someone interested in this or someone here from the foundation, it could be kind of interesting probably to say, hey, we want to learn from others and tell them we are working on this, right? We had this recommendation from OpenStack, basically with data. Now that we have data, we can produce, we can understand if the actual policies that we are doing are working or not, right? Then collaboration with PTLs, project team leaders, so basically the technical leaders. Just tell them, hey, we are producing this data, this is specifically for your community, how can we deal, right? Bring women to key positions. We have in the report, there are some numbers about women in the keynotes in OpenStack, which is around at 30% and so on, so it's quite of interest. Keep supporting this kind of working groups, enforce the code of conduct. I would say that something is really interesting is documentation, so document everything. Have a clear onboarding process that works pretty well, as far as I know, at least from OpenStack, I don't know in Python. And mentoring, so having mentors is something absolutely awesome. So some open questions here. I don't know if someone from the foundation are actually talking with some other foundations, so if you are aware of this, or if you would like to help with this analysis, it would be great. I don't know if there are other initiatives within the Python Software Foundation. I have a question here that is basically my perception is that the companies are the ones bringing a big percentage of women to the communities because they are the ones that have the interest. So they put basically developers, and it happens that at some points they have between 10–20% of the population of their tech working groups. So they are putting that working groups in the projects, right? So what's going on with the rest of the community? This is quite interesting. I would say that the decisions should be made on data, right? Because if not, we have perceptions, we have opinions, so we need data, right? Of course, let's go for this. There is room for improvement of the data. As you saw in the donuts, there's a percentage of unknown developers. So, of course, there is room for improvement. The algorithm works with probability. I did some manual work, so the data can be improved, but we have a first approach, right? So we have data. We can start with something. Hopefully, it's useful for you, at least to, hey, this is the data, let's see. And I'd love to learn from all of you about Python communities. And this is all, so thank you for your time.
We still have 2 minutes, so if you have any questions.
You're on right now, but how do you think we got here in the first place?
I remember this analysis of the from the US that they had this chart about the women participating in some technical degrees. After the 80s, you have physics, mathematics, and so on. So the percentage of women were basically increasing. In computer science, there was a drop. I have no idea. I remember when I started all of this, I talked to this guy from the UNESCO, David Storti. He's in charge of the open source office at UNESCO. And then specifically, they were working with women and diversity in general. Their conclusion at the very end was that we should go to high schools and schools to let the girls, basically, that there's technology and this is for everyone. And this is the kind of initiatives they are having. How we are here today, I don't know, it's probably a cultural thing. Society, we as a society, we have failed, right? Probably.
Any other question?
Yep.
I'm a researcher of the social media, so I always to separate the Jordan, the May and the February. So it's how to use the social media to separate to Jordan. In your case.
So the algorithm is as simple as focus on the first name. Yeah. So that's all. Of course, gender is not a binary thing, right? But I need to have something.
When you think about the development to separate or you classify to category?
Most of the work was done by the API, and that's a huge database they have. It's in genderize.io. So I basically didn't personally produce code to analyze that.
Okay. You just, so your database is by yourself, not have the capture online. Database is by yourself to capture online or
No, the database, it's a service provided by a research group in Denmark. So basically, yeah, it's in Denmark, so it's not me, it's not us. It's for free around 1,000 names per day, kind of that.
I need this database to research, so
Okay,
you can share this database with me.
sure. Yeah, we can discuss later.
Thank you, Daniel, for such an interesting talk and very important for all of us. I think it's great.
Thank you.